This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This week, Aaron Newcomb and I talk with Jeremy Katz and Louis Villa of Tidelift, which has a platform for maintainers. How do you get maintainers paid? A lot of different ways to do that. But as open source gets more and more, not just corporatized, it's really the corporate world is depending on this utterly, the symbiosis between the way corporations do things and the way code gets written is a pretty big deal. It's a moving picture, and these guys know a lot about it, and they are coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 676, recorded Wednesday, April 13th, 2022. Tidelift, a platform for maintainers. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV has everything you need to level up your IT skills while you still enjoy the journey. Visit itpro.tv/twit for an additional 30% off all consumer subscriptions for the lifetime of your active subscription when you use code TWIT30 at checkout. And by Collide. Get endpoint management that puts the user first. Visit collide.com/floss. That's KOLIDE.com/floss to learn more and activate a free 14-day trial today. No credit card required. And by New Relic. That next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does. And you can get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data free per month forever. No credit card required. Sign up at newrelic.com/floss. Hello again, everybody, whoever you are, wherever it is today. This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. Welcome. And my guest host this time is Aaron Newcomb. How you doing, Aaron? Better than me.
Good. How are you doing, Doc? I'm back. I'm back at the Computer Chronicles.
You are back at the Computer Chronicles. That's located in the past, like I am in a lot of ways. So you're dressed warm. Is it cold up there where you are?
It absolutely is. It was like it barely got above 60 yesterday, which is unseasonably cold for even for the Bay Area. If you're outside of the city anyway. So yeah, super cold, and so I had to dress up and put on some old swag. And that's why you have it, right? That's why you collect this swag. Is when it gets cold, you can have something to throw on quickly.
I have this out of some of my old. You can't see this, but those are your visual. This is a coat that I have.
Oh, yeah.
From 2008. That's what that one. A movie. I wanted to see what movie it was, but I went to in 2008, and there were two stubs, so I must have had a date. Anyway, this is how old stuff works. Well, we because we're off to a late start because of me, and because I have to end earlier than I usually do. Just jump into this. This is Tidelift, Jeremy Katz and Louis Villa. I'm not sure which. I'm guessing it's Villa. You know about these guys and what they're doing?
I don't. Although we were chatting before the show, and I guess Louis was on the show 4 years ago. We'll have to get the chat room to track down that episode. I haven't had time to look it up, but I guess he was on FLOSS Weekly a while back, so we can ask him about that when we bring him on. That's
great. From our Department of Repetition department. We've been at this for 15 years, so we're going to catch. I think it's 15 years at this point. I started at 13, so.
I started 14 years ago, or maybe 15 now. Actually,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's amazing when I go back and look at all the things. It's like, now I work on. I do a lot of work with Kubernetes for Sysdig where I work. And, I go back and I was like, oh yeah, we actually had the guys from Google on to talk about Kubernetes when they were still developing it. Like, it's just kind of amazing,
Well, that's going back there. I want to get into the show, but first I have to let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV. The world of IT is colossal and always changing. Where do you start to get the updated certs and training you need? Whether you're a seasoned IT professional or just getting started, IT Pro TV is the online learning IT education platform you need to advance your skills in IT. IT Pro TV has 7 studios, and they film Monday through Friday. They have the most up-to-date content with every vendor and skill you need to advance your IT career. Their courses go from the studio to their course library in 24 hours and are divided into 20 to 30-minute episodes for easy binging. They make sure you're prepared for your exams with their virtual labs and practice tests. The best part about IT Pro TV is that you can learn and get certified on your own schedule, and it is always entertaining. April is Linux month at IT Pro TV. Check out the on-demand webinar with Don Pezzett and Daniel Lowry focused on choosing the right Linux distro in 2022. And IT Pro TV's Linux Free Weekend is scheduled for April 23rd to 24th. You don't want to miss it. IT Pro TV has over 138 hours of Linux training available. Here are a couple of courses you may want to check out: Linux Shell Scripting Basics, LPIC 2 Linux Engineer, or Linux Command Line, plus so many more. Don't forget about your IT team. Check out an IT Pro TV business plan for your team today. Visit itpro.tv/twit for an additional 30% off all consumer subscriptions for the lifetime of your active subscription when you use code TWIT30. That's itpro.tv/twit and use code TWIT30 for an additional 30% off for the lifetime of your active subscription. IT Pro TV, build or expand your IT career and enjoy the journey. Okay, so I want to get right into it. Our guest today, and I have to get to the right page to remember everything. Jeremy Katz and Luis Villa of Tidelift. How are you guys? Welcome to my screen and other people's ears. There they are. Four of us. Where are you guys?
Well, I'm in San Francisco, actually in the city, so we're not too far away, me and Aaron. The company is distributed.
Yeah, and I'm right outside of Boston, so 60 sounds positively warm. So,
yeah. We're just outside of Boston.
Medford,
where exactly?
Actually.
Where?
Medford.
Oh, Medford, yeah.
Medford. Billy West used to say that Medford gave its D's to Sesame Street because it's pronounced Meffer. Meffa. I lived in Arlington for years and worked in Cambridge, so I'm familiar with the territory. My favorite story is standing on Massachusetts Avenue and somebody pulling up and saying, "Can you tell me where Massachusetts Avenue is? Because I can't find it because the streets aren't marked very well." I told him, "Lucky you're on it." Anyway, so give us the background on Tidelift, because I think we're all new to it, and so give us the premise on that.
Jeremy, you want to kick off, or?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. I'll do the most basic version possible. We've started Tidelift really to help both enterprises make better use of open source software, and also, working with open source maintainers to help them with various things up to and including paying them. Actually, I'm out of frame, but yeah, pay the maintainers. So that's kind of where we started. I think the super quick version.
All 4 of the founders have been involved in open. Well, at least 3 of us have been involved since before the phrase open source was coined, back when it was still free software. And you guys were saying in the pre-show that you've been doing this now for 15 years, right? And it has changed so much in that time, including how people relate to it, how people consume it, right? We used to talk about the LAMP stack, and you could essentially, if you understood the security and licensing of 4 pieces of software, you were in good shape. And now, if you're, now everybody, table stakes is 1,000 pieces of software is your stack, right? And very common 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 pieces of software. And that depersonalizes all this to a great extent. And so we're trying to essentially rebuild that relationship in some ways and make open source better for everybody, including by paying the maintainers who are doing all this critical labor for this entire economy.
That's great. I mean, I know that our company, for example, sponsors several open source projects for that very reason, right? Because it's hard. It's great software, but typically you have an issue that people are doing all this great work, and then a community develops around it, and you have this huge open source project now that lots of people are using, but it takes so much time that these developers, the primary developers for these open source projects, typically just don't get paid for the work that they're doing. And sometimes it tends to kind of take over their lives. And so I think the historical model has been, correct me if I'm wrong, that large companies or companies that made, good use of the open source projects would kind of swoop in and say, hey, we want to keep this going. I know that happened even when I was at Sun. We were sponsoring many open source projects just to help the developers kind of keep them afloat, so to speak, and kind of give them some money so that they could actually live while they were developing these open source projects. So I'm kind of curious, is that changing now? I mean, why not just go with the traditional mechanism of just finding a big company that can put out some dollars for this?
Because it doesn't work for the whole stack is essentially the answer, right? That is still very much present. But I was at a big conference recently, and somebody told me, "Oh yeah, I'm with one of the small projects here. We only have like 12 or 15 maintainers on this project." And the thing is, the median number. This was true on SourceForge back in the day. It's true on GitHub now. It's true on NPM. The median number of maintainers for a project is 1. Right. So if so there's nothing against these big projects, right? It's great that there's a wide variety of 501c3s, 501c6s, consultancies, all kinds of stuff for these larger projects. But your company absolutely depends not just on these brand name projects like Kubernetes or Docker or, pick your JavaScript framework of choice. Like your CTO and your VP, they know about 4, 5, 6 projects, maybe 10 that the company depends on. But the other literally 9,990, the CTO or VP can't name. They're pulled in automatically. They have one maintainer. And you as a company can't, the overhead of hiring all those people or sending them a support contract or a consulting contract would eat you up, right? So what we do is we pool that. All of our customers send their usage data to us, and then we go out and find, okay, well, these are the things that are used by all of our customers. Let's go out and get those people, right? Because if we're pooling all our customers, we can give you the money that makes it worthwhile, while for our customers, reducing the overhead of contracting with and supporting all those folks, right? Like we can be the middleman that makes that scale in a good way. Right. Because it's just, I think maybe the really short answer, that was a sort of long answer. The really short answer for the old model just isn't scaling with the size of open source. I think is really what it boils down to.
Yeah.
So what's the benefit? Oh, yeah, go ahead. No, finish the thought.
Yeah. Another thing that really factors into things that we've seen, and this goes back to the 20 years of open source, is sometimes people will get hired because they worked on something and they will work on it as part of their day job, but then their day job will take over. Boss factor is a thing. If I got hired to work because I worked on some open source project, I may actually find things that are more shiny or more interesting in this company that hired me, and then spend less time on the project than I did before, which is this weird, like, unexpected outcome that, has happened forever.
Right. Yeah. Jared. Oh, go ahead.
No. Finish up.
I was just going to say, Jeremy talked about boss factor, and we've long talked about the bus factor, which besides being a little macabre, everybody's like, well, what happens if the leader of this project is hit by a bus? That doesn't actually happen very often, right? Much more often, and there's data to back this up. What happens is your boss says, hey, we're no longer a PHP shop. Now we're a Java shop, right? Well, now your PHP libraries are abandoned. Or your boss says, hey, we're sunsetting this product that used your open source library. It's no longer something that we're going to, or as Jeremy says, you just decide what you lose interest because of something cool new at work, or you have a new puppy or a new kid. All those things are very real.
Yeah, for sure. How long has Tidelift been around? When did you guys start this?
Be 5 years next month.
5 years this summer. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Coming up on 5 years.
And if I was a company looking into Tidelift, what's in it for me? Like, what does the company get out of using Tidelift? And I'm just thinking from a business perspective. A lot of people don't understand the value of open source. Especially the kind of the higher up you get in a company. I think they're starting to now, but traditionally they have not. So what's in it for me as like a CFO, and somebody comes to me and says, hey, we want to support our open source stuff that we were getting for free before. Now you and I know that's, all the ins and outs of that, but let's just say that was their perspective. What do they get in return?
Jeremy, you want to answer that one? Because I think it's, I would say that Jeremy's the best person to answer that, in part because the value shouldn't be something we have to demonstrate to the financial folks. It should be something we demonstrate to the engineering folks, right? Because that's where the real pain and benefit can come from.
Yeah, and I think that what we see is that the real benefits come from let's make the engineering team more productive. It turns out engineers aren't all experts in security or the minutia of open source licensing, even if some of us in the past used to email open source mailing lists with, I am not a lawyer, but ... That's not what engineers are sort of best at. They're not. And so how can we help the engineering teams be more effective, more efficient, and be able to spend more time actually building applications and not doing this minutia is really the big win. And then, you can see that from an enterprise-wide view. You can see where are we using things, where are the when inevitably there are security vulnerabilities like Log4Shell at the end of last year. How can we get the view of what's impacted? What are the most critical applications to work with and help get the upgrade done quickly?
Yeah, I think this is, I'm going to answer the question a little indirectly. So I'm a former programmer turned attorney. And when I was at a big law firm, we had all these tools that maybe some of your listeners are familiar with that would scan for license issues, right? They'd look at all your source code and they'd say, oh, this one is some license that you don't like, or we can't figure out what license this is. And there was this weird dynamic where, because the lawyers were involved, because it was a licensing question, it would stop the developers, right? You wouldn't be able to use the thing because the license was bad or incomplete or something. And then I would get called in and paid many, many, many dollars per hour to negotiate with the upstream developer to fix the problem, right? And the upstream developer saw none of that money. So there was a lot of money going into the scanning tool. There's a lot of money going to the lawyer. The developers on both sides were frustrated, right? It was low for the developers who were trying to use it at the company, and it was slow and unrewarding for the developers of the upstream thing. All they saw was somebody's making a lot of money here. Like, the company that's using this thing is making enough money to pay lawyers. The lawyers are making a lot of money because that's what we do. And but the developer down at the end of that was not doing it, right? So we hope by closing that loop, we can really make things much faster and more effective and hopefully smoother for developers at companies than the traditional scanning tools have done.
So I'm wondering, so you mentioned earlier, I think Jeremy said it, you have this enterprise-wide view. And I'm wondering how you get that, or how that manifests to you. And also it differs by companies. You're dealing with a lot of big companies there on your list. And I imagine, being an outside firm, you're not going to get the same view of all of them, and you're going to run into some kinds of resistance. And so I'm wondering, what are the kind of typical problems you run into, and how do those differ?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of how do we, it certainly does vary from company to company. But, we're increasingly seeing we're in the era where everybody is using cloud services. They have to use cloud services. A previous startup I was at was very much in the we can't convince people to use a cloud service because their questionnaires ask about using modems. We've mostly gotten past that. So mostly that doesn't come up anymore. But it really is this, we want to make it so that they can feel comfortable sending us effectively an SBOM. What are the bill of materials? What are the open source components they use? And making it so that's the only thing we need to have access to. And that has done a lot to make it easier for companies. Like, people have a much easier sort of path to share that information, especially because we're also starting to see, companies requiring their vendors to give this sort of information to them. So, there's just an increasing level of confidence around, this is just sort of bare minimum. Everybody's sharing this stuff.
Yeah, it's such a radical change from a long time ago where the package management is finally, we've been talking about it for years, right? Since the days of CPAN in Perl. But that's finally sort of the dominant paradigm, I think, in a way that simplifies a lot of stuff that used to be really hard.
A list of questions here, and I got past them. So, okay, it's really interesting to me that having to use cloud services has sort of made every company identical in some ways. Is that part of what you're saying? That it's like the world of enterprise according to AWS in a way. Is that a fair summary of that? And where does that go? I'm wondering, having that giant a dependency.
So it's actually broader than AWS. So it's actually not the world according to AWS, because AWS is just one piece. They're all using Salesforce. Many of them are using Atlassian products. Many of them are using the Atlassian cloud. Many of them are using, all of the, Google Workspace, all of these things. It's, increasingly impractical for even the largest of large enterprises to just run everything themselves in-house. It's just not efficient. And so there is this degree of, while every one of them is very different, there are similarities, and they are starting, this is the future, and they've kind of embraced it. And, much like it felt like it took forever for those of us that have been using open source forever to see, Linux on the server in the enterprise and things like that. It feels like it took forever while we were there, but for people from the outside, it feels like it was overnight. And so this is the same sort of thing. It's like it's just become the de facto norm.
Yeah. And it's changed. And I think, where some things have standardized, right? But that has allowed other things to become wildly divergent, right? Everybody uses the same top 200 NPM packages, right? As we found out, everybody uses Log4Shell, Log4j rather. Everybody unintentionally uses Log4Shell. But down at the ends of those long tails are still very spread out. And that's where we think our model of bringing together a whole lot of different companies really helps us, right? Because if you're a company and you think you're the only user you know of who's using something down that long tail, it doesn't make sense to contract with that person. It doesn't make sense to call them up and say, hey, can I sign you up for an SLA? Whereas if we are bundling you with another 10 or 100 or 1,000 companies that are using that dependency, then it makes sense for us to make that call and make that contact. And then so standardization is really helpful in that way that it never would have been in the day when we were all just sort of downloading, we were using CVS to get stuff from SourceForge. Now that it's all more standardized in NPM or in Maven or what have you for the various languages, like that really helps. It's the standardization in some ways really helps enable different things to happen at other layers of the stack.
I have a question about that, Ed, but I have to let everybody know first that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Collide. That's Collide with a K. Collide is a new take on endpoint management that asks the question, how can we get end users more involved? This is in contrast to old school device management tools like MDM, which lock down your employees' devices without considering their needs or even attempting to educate them about the security of their laptop. Collide is built by like-minded security practitioners who in the past saw just how much MDM was disrupting their end users, often frustrating them so bad that they would throw up their hands and just switch to using their personal laptops without telling anyone. In that scenario, everyone loses. Collide, on the other hand, is different. Instead of locking down a device, Collide takes a user-focused approach that communicates security recommendations to your employees directly on Slack. After Collide is set up, device security turns from a black and white state to a dynamic conversation. This conversation starts with the end users installing the endpoint agent on their own through a guided process that happens right inside their first Slack message. From there, Collide regularly sends employees recommendations when their device is in an insecure state. This can range from simple problems like the screen lock not being set correctly to hard to solve and nuanced issues like asking people to secure two-factor backup code sitting in their downloads folder properly. And because it's talking directly to employees, Collide is educating them about the company's policies and how to best keep their devices secure using real tangible examples, not theoretical scenarios. Collide, cross-platform endpoint management for Linux, Mac, and Windows devices that puts end users first for teams that Slack. Get endpoint management that puts the user first. Visit collide.com/floss to learn more and activate a free 14-day trial today. No credit card required. Visit KOLIDE.com/floss today. And right now, you can get a goodie bag of Collide swag after signing up for a new trial as their way of saying thank you. Okay, so I'm wondering
too if you get that swag.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is unprompted.
Yeah,
this is unprompted, but I just want to say I love that like security through misery visual that was in that ad, right? Because that's exactly like so many of the proposals around open source security these days involve making somebody miserable. And we just, to some extent, we think, one way of summarizing what we do at Tidelift is, look, open source is becoming more professional. That's mostly a good thing, but it does mean more work for maintainers. And if you're going to ask me, if the White House is telling you, hey, open source maintainers, you should do more work, like at some point, that's not going to work anymore, right? Like at some point, people are going to say, you know what, if I've got to do scans and fuzzing and this and that and the other, like they get why it's important, right? Open source developers are smart. They understand security matters. They have pride in their work. But like at some point, it's going to start sucking up all your time in a way that we think paying the maintainers for that kind of work really makes sense, right?
So you were saying earlier that you deal with these like 1,000 companies, and you're also dealing with these long tail issues where you've got LAMP in the middle, you have all these other code bases out there, some of them with very small populations of contributors. Are you like kind of effectively kind of a corporate integrator or a long tail integrator where you're sharing intelligence between these different companies, or they're just relying on you and therefore they're getting the benefit of collective intelligence that's coming in through your offices? Kind of wonder how cross-pollination works there.
I mean, there's a few different ways. There's both technical, there's simply the more folks who are using it, who are using a given library, the more focus and energy on it, right? Through a variety of different metrics. I mean, the big thing is simply we cannot sign up all open source maintainers to our platform. So what we do is we prioritize by customer use, right? So if you get an email from us this afternoon, for example, saying we have money for you, that's probably going to be because we have a large number of customers who are using your thing, right? And we prioritize that search for new maintainers to partner with based on our customer data. And so that is very aggregated on that side, right? I mean, we don't, unless a customer specifically asks us to, we don't then go and say, oh yeah, these are the companies using your thing, because that's obviously a security issue for those companies. They like to generally remain more private. But if they ask us to, we can share that information, and there we can help build channels there. I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, though.
It does. It's interesting to me that the way code grows actually is an awful lot of social intelligence that goes along with it, and it's kind of a collective effort, right? But it's all isolated. It's isolated to this base, that base, that base, that base, and it varies a great deal. I mean, we always talk about licenses, which is almost like an attention sink, but actually the behavior of within the different code bases. I'm most familiar with Linux because I was an editor for Linux Journal forever, but and it kind of percolates down from Linus's personality. But all of these maintainers are not only human beings; they all have their own methods, right? That's being normalized more, lots on GitHub and so forth. But you're dealing with a lot of different ways of doing things.
One of the things that I think that is hard for those of us. I mean, look, Jeremy and I both read Slashdot before Slashdot had accounts, right? And my user number on Slashdot, which admittedly I haven't read in a long time, but like back, there was literally a time when just about everybody in open source read the same blog and commented on the same blog, right? And you could have a conference that legitimately could claim a large percentage of the people in open source are here in this building. And of course, that's impossible now, right? And that's simultaneously a sign of great success, but also a sign of there's no such thing as open source, right? There are many different open sources. JavaScript open source is very different from Linux kernel open source, is very different from the Kubernetes community. There's some, like at the very highest level, is people getting together on the internet and writing source code. But in so many other ways, it's not standardized. And that's both a lot of fun, but of course also, very challenging, right?
And one of the things we've talked about, Lewis, is also how we can help bring some of those people together. We can give a common place. We can start to give some commonalities, both within the JavaScript open source, but also across JavaScript to Python, or JavaScript to Python to Java to even .NET, and really being able to sort of help, many of the people in those communities end up solving the same problems over and over again. We can be a place to help kind of connect those people so that they don't have to all solve the same problems.
Yeah, that's one of the fun parts of the community building work we're doing, is that Python people often talk to other Python people, but they don't necessarily talk to JavaScript people or Ruby people, especially the ones at the top, right? Like, and there's knowledge sharing that we are seeing how to do there, which I think is pretty cool.
So Jeremy, I want to know, we talked a lot about the problems and, why they need to be addressed and things, but I want to know how this actually works, like the nuts and bolts of it. So like, I'm just kind of going through the product pages and things. I mean, it looks like this is a cloud service, but then somehow you're collecting information. Like, are you using an agent model? Like, how does this actually work, Jeremy, the nuts and bolts of it?
Yeah. I mean, the nuts and bolts of how most customers integrate is that we basically plug into their continuous integration, their continuous deployment platform. So, as you're running tests, luckily we have advanced from 20 years ago when people didn't regularly write and run tests. But tests are regularly written and run. The run is part of a pipeline. So basically we fit into that pipeline into your Jenkins or your Circle CI or your Travis or your Azure DevOps or whatever you happen to use. And that's the place where we basically plug in. We have a command line tool that kind of gets invoked from that pipeline that just, generates the bill of materials, sends it to us, and then we can evaluate it and check it.
And
cool.
return
yep. That was
I was going to say, and we can return information like these licenses here past your security, past your licensing policies. There are no open CVEs in these versions, or there are open CVEs in these versions. Please use a newer version. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we generate that information in partnership with the maintainers.
Right. Right. And then who would be the end user for this? Who's actually logging in to check this stuff out? Is it developers, or is it SREs, or is it one level up from there? Is it architects, or like you say, lawyers for the company, checking this out? Who's using it?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of it's a mix. So a lot of times, and this is where it really gets into company to company is very different. There are plenty of companies that have a team that's focused on, this is our build platform, this is how we do everything in CI/CD, and those teams then work across the organization to kind of do the initial setup. But then it really is still the engineers on a daily basis that are seeing, the log output in their CI of like, oh, this is using something that's not allowed. This is using, you should update to log4j 2.17.2. You should update to the newest version of Moment, which I forget the version number of at the moment. But, all of those sorts of things, the developers will see. And then there's also kind of a manager view. There is sort of that manager, architect, director view to kind of see across their team, across their teams, what is kind of the overall health and sort of using that.
Yeah, that makes sense, because what I see in my day to day is that there's a lot of, with the move to DevOps, there's a lot more teams than there used to be. There's a lot more bifurcation than there used to be, and so you get people, a developer hears about something that they think could be useful in their project, and they deploy it, right? And then it gets kind of like other project leaders hear about that, or other teams hear about it. They start using it. It's really hard to, you want to give developers access to the tools and projects that they need to make their applications more performant or more competitive or whatever. But at the same time, you're giving away some of that central control over what they actually deploy, right?
Oops, if I can actually hit unmute. They actually, there is this like whole notion of let's give the things that we know are in use, that we're very comfortable with, whether it's a Java web app framework, a JavaScript front end framework, whatever it is, sort of these big pieces, and really call those, I mean, Netflix called it a paved path. I think that's still actually a great phrase of like, to make it easy for developers and engineers to know the things that we feel are the best for most cases. But there is this acknowledgement that there are the other cases, and that, we have to have the tools, we have to have the ability for engineering teams and application developers to make choices for something else because they have a special case. And those are going to happen. And much like, the early days of the cloud, when it was developers going off and like in the shadows signing up for an AWS account and don't tell the IT team. No, now it's like, we want to know, we want to have that visibility across the enterprise because we know this has to happen. And by saying, don't do this, all that actually means is that it's happening and nobody's telling us.
Yeah, for sure. So Louis, I wanted to ask, maybe we'll let you answer this question. How do people actually get paid? And how do project maintainers, open source project folks get involved if they see this and they say, hey, we want to hop on that train. We'd like to get paid for some of this. We know there's a lot of companies using our software that we're writing. How does that happen?
So two ways. It's funny, actually. So I'm an old community hand, right? I've been doing community, open source community stuff, again, for disturbingly long time now. And so I've actually had to learn community building is a skill. And sales and recruiting is a related but different skill. Have had to learn a little bit of that in this role. And, there's two ways, right? You can literally go to our website, type in your package name. And if it's a package that our customers are using or that we think near future customers might use, it will tell you, hey, sign up and we will pay you X a month, right? And so that's one way. The other way is if you get an email from us, open it up because it might have some good news for you in it. Like I said, we do that proactive outreach based very directly on customer needs. And then what happens is a couple things, right? So you get that email from us, or say you go to the website after the show and you find out that actually you can make some money. Then we brief you on some of the work that you might do, verifying license information, agreeing to let us know about CVEs, making sure that you have a security escalation process in place, which we can help you with if you don't already have. But if you have one that you're already comfortable with, that's fine. We just need to know that it exists. A few other things along those lines, right, that are mostly good maintainership behavior already, right? We don't require you to get on the phone with our customers and dance at their beck and call or anything like that. It's really sort of basic nuts and bolts kind of stuff that you agree to do on a reliable basis, and we monitor through our tool. And then once you're okay with that, you sign a contract with us that says essentially you'll continue doing it, you'll abide by our code of conduct, and then we set you up with a payment tool that pays you monthly. That's pretty much the basics there. And then we check in, every once in a while we may introduce a new kind of task. For example, trying to think of any one we have in the pipeline that would be easy to explain. We may change how we do our licensing stuff a little bit, right? So every once in a while we'll drop you a note and say, hey, the licensing standards are getting more complex. We'd love to do, I think this is something that is probably some ways off, but it's a fun example for me as a former QA guy, fuzzing. For those of your readers who are familiar with fuzzing as a QA technique, we'd love to, have that be integrated somehow, right? So that you'd be paid in order to implement that fuzzing that otherwise might be a lot of work.
So one more quick question, and then I'll let Doc jump in and ask some of his stuff. But how is that calculated? I didn't read through the contributor or how to become a, part of. I know there's a part of that on the website, but is it like based on usage or?
Yeah, it's based on a combination of our customer usage and the size of your package, right? And there's all kinds of. I could go on for literally the rest of the call about size of the package. We know that's not a perfect metric, suffice to say. But there's still some correlation between we don't want to pay a 5-line JavaScript package the same amount as, some very large Java package, for example, right? So there's some tweaks in there for that. And we're hoping to announce a revamp of that algorithm a little in a little while that will hopefully make that a lot more transparent, because right now it's sort of opaque. Not that we're trying to hide anything, it's just overly complicated, so a little hard to explain. But it does boil down to size and usage. Again, usage by our customers.
So I have a question about the whole subscription economy, but I want to bring that up after I let you guys know, let the world know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by New Relic. If you're a software engineer, you've been there, it's 9 p.m., you're finally unwinding from work, your phone buzzes with an alert, something's broken and your mind's already racing at what could be wrong. Is it the back end or the front end? Is it global? Is it the server? Is it the network? Is it the cloud provider? Do we have slow running queries? Did I introduce a bug in my last deploy? Now the whole team is scrambling from tool to tool and messaging person after person to find and fix the issue. According to a New Relic report, only half of all organizations are implementing observability for their networks and systems. The report showed how maintaining network observability continues to be an issue for companies around the world. That won't happen if you get New Relic. New Relic combines 16 different monitoring products that you normally buy separately, so engineering teams can see across their entire software stack in one place. You'll get application monitoring, APM, unified monitoring for your apps and microservices, Kubernetes and Pixie, instant Kubernetes observability with Pixie, distributed tracing, see all your traces without management headaches so you can find and fix issues fast, network performance monitoring, stop guessing where performance issues start, and ditch data silos for a system-wide correlated view, and so much more. More importantly, you can pinpoint issues down to the line of code so you know exactly why the problem happened and can resolve it quickly. That's why the dev and ops teams at DoorDash, Epic, GitHub, Games, and more than 14,000 other companies use New Relic to debug and improve their software. Whether you run a cloud-native startup or a Fortune 500 company, it takes just 5 minutes to set up New Relic in your environment. That next 9 p.m. call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does. And you can get access to the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigabytes of data free per month forever. No credit card required. Sign up at newrelic.com/floss. That's NEWRELIC.com/floss. newrelic.com/floss. Okay, this is close to the last question.
Over. Now that the ad's over, I'll give you a little trivia about New Relic. Since I used to work there, the name New Relic is actually a version of the founder Lou Cerny's name. When he came up, he was trying to come up with a name for the company. He typed in different words that he could make with his name, Lou Cerny, and one of them was New Relic, and so that's what he went with.
Wow, the background of so many things is weird. There was a store that became part of Costco called Price Club that I thought was all about price, but it was started by a guy named Price. His name just happened to be Price. Anyway, and we're close to the end of the show here. I want to ask you guys a broad question quickly about the subscription economy. You guys have a subscription model, and there's something about this that's what we're experiencing as people is similar to what the corporate world is experiencing. Well, the corporate world that you guys deal with is running on clouds and so forth. We are too. You know, my email used to be a server under my desk. My web server used to be a box under my desk. These things are now in clouds, even though, you know, Searls.com runs on something, but it actually runs in a cloud. I don't have it in a rack anymore. But at the same time, everybody wants a subscription. Like there's television has turned entirely into a subscription model. Almost nobody's watching over-the-air TV anymore. Radio is turning into podcasts. Podcasts are subscriptions. Music subscriptions. No, you listen to music radio? No, not really. I'm on Spotify or something. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how the subscription economy works, and if we're going toward peak subscription. Like at some point, people and companies are going to say, "Okay, I'm enough. We're drawing a line here." This is a subject on your table at all?
Oh boy. I mean, yes and no. Like from a corporate perspective, I don't think we're seeing the enterprises that buy software at this level. They'll negotiate with you, right? Like they would rather pay less rather than more, but overall they still see a lot of benefit from outsourcing this kind of thing, exactly because it can bring them efficiencies that they can't do themselves, right? Like there's nothing stopping conceptually, if you've got 10,000 dependencies in your open source stack and you want them all supported, there's nothing conceptually stopping you from not doing that as a subscription, right? And like going out and signing 10,000 contracts with 10,000 developers. It just wouldn't, the overhead from that would eat you alive. And so they see value in, essentially subscribing to folks with expertise, which is us, to go out and find those developers and work with them. I do think there's a more general, there's some really interesting discussions around the commercialization of open source specifically, right? And the subscription-y, like the future of open source. And I think those are hard conversations, but I got to admit to some frustration when it's like employees of literally trillion-dollar companies telling me that open source shouldn't be commercialized. It's like that ship has sailed, right? Open source is very much commercialized. It's literally the center of the world software economy. And so in some sense, the center of the world economy, period. And so to like pretend that it's not a commercial thing it's just an increasingly weird fiction, an increasingly weird story we tell ourselves, right? It's not one I love. I mean, there was very much a joy, and still is very much a joy, in building these things because we love the technology, because we love the people we're doing it with. But that has a lot of shortcomings as well. And I think the more honest we are about what those shortcomings are, the better off we'll be in the long run.
Okay, so we're down at the end of the hour here. And so we always end with 4 questions. The first is there any question we haven't asked that you'd like to answer and could answer in like less than a paragraph?
Oh, that's a good one, but I think you've hit on a lot of the high points.
Yeah, I feel like.
Well, then let's skip to the next ones, which are: do you have anything to say about blockchain? You might, given all the companies you deal with. That's one of our 3 control questions. We ask that every time, just because we started and we're not stopping.
We were raising money in 2017 at like peak of like the first blockchain bubble, and so every investor was like, well, you sound sort of like a marketplace. Do you have a blockchain strategy? And I just couldn't, like, the idea that IT departments are also going to become currency speculators on the side to fund like their core IT stuff rather than just paying for it in good old fashioned dollars. Just never, I gotta admit, never quite made sense to me. I think there's some cool stuff going on, but like for like core IT purposes, no.
Yeah. So final 2, what are your, and there'll be 4 answers here because there are 2 of you. What are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
You want to start fights now, don't you?
Oh, that'd be fun if we had more time.
I have long been I use all of the text editors, and that actually still continues today. There are things where I use Vim for something. There are things I'm like, okay, I'm doing this in Emacs, and there are things in Visual Studio Code. So really, I am pretty, I use all the text editors. And if I'm reaching for a scripting language, I still reach for Python because I've been writing it for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it is, I was an Emacs guy, and I now have to admit that I am essentially a Word guy. Like that's the danger of going to law school. Scripting at this point is all shell pretty much, right? I'm still a bash guy at the end of the day because that's like the earliest scripting language for me and therefore the least atrophied, right? Everything else is
just glad you're not writing Perl anymore.
The only code I've ever written in true anger, like professionally, is Perl, and I'm really glad that's not my problem anymore.
There ought to be a code called Pure Anger. What did you write that in? Pure Anger. Well, guys, this has been great. Really appreciate it, and have to have you back.
Yeah.
Awesome.
This is not this issue of how we pay people to make open source better is not going to go away. And, there's so many options, us, Open Collective, GitHub sponsors. It's just going to keep being an active space, I think. So look forward to talking with you again sometime soon.
It sounds great. Yeah, it will be an active space. It's one of the oldest topics, and so and it stays new.
Yeah,
it's great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So, Aaron, how was that for you? In spite of my coming in late and screwing some things.
Oh yeah, that's no big deal. So the the thing that we didn't quite have time to get to, because I felt like we danced around the question enough, but you think about things that have happened in the industry lately, like Log4j, which we mentioned at least once, right? Where you have a maintainer that's not particularly happy, doing all that work anymore, right? I assume. And then there's either a vulnerability that's introduced, or they just stop maintaining and correcting for known vulnerabilities that are out there. And all of a sudden you've got something that's rampant across, the entire tech world with a vulnerability that's super serious. And so these type of applications and ways to pay developers and keep them productive and happy, it's super important. And it's not until something like that happens that you realize how important it is. So it's good. The work that they're doing, I think, is really, really good.
Yeah, it fills a niche, and it was not even a niche. I knew it was that clearly there. And the fact that Lewis brought up at the end there, that this is a category. Getting people paid is itself a category, and it's a growing category. It has to be. Getting everybody paid is always a category, and an awful lot of us have been doing free work forever, and it's good for some things and not for others, but it's always going to be an issue. Yeah. So give me your promo, and then we can get to move on to other things. I hate to rush things that we do.
Yeah, no problem. So first of all, I got to thank my company, Sysdig, for letting me take time out of my day. I know I had to have a meeting push today that came up after I agreed to do the show. So really, it's nice of them to want to support open source as they do, as a matter of course. So that's good. So thank you for that, for letting me do this. So go check out sysdig.com. You can see some of the things that I'm working on over there. And then, subscribe and follow my channel on YouTube as well. Retro Hack Shack. Like I said, I don't know if we were live at that point, but I haven't had much time to do videos in the past few weeks, but I will get back to doing videos. I've got new products, got a really cool adapter that I built, for example, which allows you to read and write Amiga floppies on your PC, makes it really super easy to do, along with some great software contributed by folks out there. So that's kind of a passion project of mine, fun to talk about old computers and how to keep using them in the current age as much as possible, and relive some of your childhood nostalgia as well. So check out Retro Hack Shack if you haven't already. And I did have some FLOSS Weekly viewers, by the way, that chimed in on the comments. He's like, "Hey, I watched you on FLOSS Weekly, and I came to check you out from FLOSS Weekly." So
that's awesome.
Thanks to all of my FLOSS Weekly, all the people here on FLOSS Weekly that do kind of check out what we're all doing outside of the work that we do here at TWiT.
I was thinking, you mentioned Amiga. I don't relive my childhood there. I'm actually reliving my adulthood with my children. So there's a lot of that. This is really from way back. And it was like, when I was 30.
Right.
So, right. Oh, geez. In that case, it was like in my late 20s, I think, with those kids who are now themselves like getting ready to be old. Anyway, thanks a lot, Aaron, and thanks everybody. I want to let you all know that next week we have Melody McFessel of Observable coming up, and so we'll see you then.
Did you spend a lot of money on your brand new smartphone, and then you look at the pictures on Facebook and Instagram, and you're like, what in the world happened to that photo? Yes. You have. I know. It happens to all of us. Well, you need to check out my show, Hands On Photography, where I'm going to walk you through simple tips and tricks that are going to help make you get the most out of your smartphone camera or your DSLR or mirrorless, whatever you have. And those shots are going to look so much better. I promise you. So make sure you're tuning in to twit.tv/hop for Hands On Photography to find out more.